Hi, fourth graders. It's Miss Kavarik, and I'm here with Unit 2B, Lesson 23, and we're going to be learning about the Crusades today, which are a war that happened over religion. So here's your vocab. Rousing is an adjective, and that means exciting. Access is a verb, which means approach or use. Jockeying is a verb, and that means competing for. Waned is a verb, and that means faded. A figurehead is a noun, and that's a person who holds the title of head of a group but has no real power. So they have a title, but they can't really do anything. Renowned is an adjective, and that means famous. Fractured is an adjective, and that means broken or split. Rampage is a noun, which means violent or destructive behavior. Barracks are noun, housing for soldiers. Intensively is an adjective, and that, intensively is an adjective, and that means with great effort. Elite is an adjective, and that means the choice or best of anything. Valiant is an adjective, and that means brave. Finance is a verb, and that means to provide money for. Bewildered is an adjective, and that means confused. Beset is a verb, and that means attacked or surrounded. Agitated, adjective, means upset. Page boys is a noun, and those are young messengers. And chivalry is a noun, and this was a code of honor, and it was about those knights we talked about in the Middle Ages, how they had to be respectful and hold themselves to that code. All right, so again, we're reading about the Crusades, and our big question for this chapter is, why did the Christians launch the Crusades? What was the purpose? So here is the city of Jerusalem, and that is the city that these different religions are fighting over. They want control of the city. The First Crusade. On November 27th, 1095, Pope Urban II gave a rousing speech to a congregation in southern France. The Muslims, he said, had invaded Jerusalem. Christians had a duty to claim it back. The crowd screamed in support. "God wills it," they chanted. Thousands of men, inspired by the Pope's words, went to war. The First Crusade has begun. Jerusalem was the holy city of the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews. Remember, all three religions had a common root. Pilgrimages to Jerusalem had remained common for Christians after it became a city within the Islamic Empire. But recently, it had become more difficult to access Jerusalem. A new Turkish group called the Seljuks had invaded it and did not welcome Christian pilgrims. This is one of the reasons that the Crusades were launched. There are other possible causes. Some believe the Pope was trying to win more power in Europe by uniting soldiers and kingdoms behind him. Others think it was a way to stop war between Christian nations by having them target a new enemy. Whatever the cause, the Crusades were a surprise for most Muslims. It didn't occur to them that an army from Europe would cause them problems. Normally, they would have been right. The Islamic Empire was larger, richer, and more powerful than Europe. But there was trouble within the empire. Different kingdoms were jockeying for power, and rebellions and wars were common. The Muslim armies were exhausted, and it made them vulnerable to attack from the outside. A fractured empire. By the time the Crusades, the Abbasids' power had waned. Different corners of the empire had started to rule themselves, only supporting the caliph in name. In Baghdad, the capital, the Seljuk Turks ruled as sultans, with the caliph as a mere figurehead. The Turks were renowned as warriors who were particularly skilled in archery and horsemanship. By the 11th century, therefore, the empire was fractured. Some of the groups fought one another. This made them more vulnerable to attack from the outside. The First Crusade conquered Jerusalem and many other cities in less than 3 years. As the Crusades swept into Jerusalem, soldiers went on a rampage, massacring some of the inhabitants. In a letter to a relative, an elderly Jewish man described the massacre. They killed everyone in the city, Muslims or Jews. The few who survived were made prisoners. We all hoped that our Sultan would chase these men away, but time after time our hopes failed. Yet to this very moment we hope that God will give our Sultan's enemies into his hands. The Second Crusade. The First Crusade had been a success for the Europeans. They had conquered Jerusalem in a very short period, catching the Muslim armies by surprise. For 40 years they ruled successfully, establishing large castles to defend their territory. But the Muslims were regrouping. In 1144 they launched a successful attack on Edessa, a large city held by the Crusaders. The fall of Edessa signaled the first major Muslim victory against the Crusaders and prompted a second crusade from Europe with new armies. While the First Crusade was a victory for Europe, the second was a humiliation. The armies of the Second Crusade did not even try to reconquer Edessa. Instead, they tried to attack the great city of Damascus in 1148. They were defeated and had to retreat. All right, so let's read about the Mamluks. Early in Islamic history, beginning with the Umayyads, the caliphs had started to rely on soldiers from outside of Arabia. People from across the empire joined their armies, including non-Muslims. Some of these people became Mamluk soldiers. The Mamluks were a unique group, mostly Turkic, from the Caucasus, formerly property of the caliph. They started training from a very young age. Boys as young as 13 were converted to Islam, placed in barracks, and worked intensively to learn archery, sword fighting, and horsemanship. They developed deep friendships with one another and loyalty to their officers and caliph. They became the most elite and effective fighting force in the empire. Many Mamluks themselves rose to power, becoming generals of the armies. Often, only those who were Mamluks were eligible for the highest positions. The Mamluks were important fighters in the later Crusades, and eventually, after they defeated the Crusaders, they formed a dynasty that ruled Egypt, Syria, and most of Arabia. Saladin and the Third Crusade. Salah ad-Din, or Saladin to the Europeans, is one of the most remarkable leaders in history. Before the Third Crusade, he had followed his uncle, a famous general, and conquered many of the fractured Islamic territories, including Egypt and Syria. He was a great military leader and was also seen as a wise, compassionate man. Saladin was initially willing to leave Jerusalem in the hands of the Christians, and he signed a treaty promising this. But then one of the Crusader leaders, Reynald de Chatillon, broke the treaty. This caused Saladin to attack the Crusaders, defeat them, and capture Jerusalem. In 1187, it was these events that sparked the Third Crusade, led by one of the most famous warriors in medieval Europe, King Richard I of England, known as the Lionheart for his bravery. And this is Salah ad-Din, who is the first Sultan of Egypt and Syria, and he also founded the Ayyubid dynasty. All right, so we are going to read a story now. I just want to let you guys know that these questions are either going to be from the informational passage we just read, and some of them are going to be about this historical fiction story of Saladin and Richard the Lionheart. A curse on Reynald de Chatillon, mumbled Richard the Lionheart, King of England, as he tossed and turned in his tent. His fever had raged for days, and he was desperate for water in this dry and hot land. "Do you not mean a curse on Saladin, your majesty?" asked one of his attendants. "No, I do not," snapped the king, who hadn't realized he had spoken aloud. "Reynald got us into this mess. Saladin signed a treaty promising to leave Jerusalem alone, and Reynald broke it. We all knew he was an evil man, but attacking those Muslim caravans was stupid as well as wicked. Now I'm suffering, desperate for cool water in this terrible land, because of Reynald's actions. But sire, protested his attendant, Reynald de Chatillon was our ally. He died a valiant death at the hands of Saladin. Ally? The king asked incredulously, his cheeks flushing hotter. Ally? The man was a menace. Remember when he decided to attack the Emperor of Byzantium? He asked that great Christian leader, the Patriarch of Antioch, to finance his war. When the Patriarch refused, Reynald had the poor man stripped, beaten, covered in honey, and left in the hot sun. When he was finally released, the Patriarch was so exhausted he agreed to give Reynald as much money as he liked. No, with allies like that, the king continued, we are in little need of enemies. In truth, I cannot blame Saladin for killing him and retaking Jerusalem. Your Majesty, I do not understand, said the poor, bewildered attendant. You traveled all the way from England to retake Jerusalem. Now you say Saladin should have it? You're not listening, the king chided. Of course Jerusalem should be in the hands of Christians. That doesn't mean I think Reynald behaved well. Honestly, I am far more beset by my so-called allies than by my enemy, Saladin. Take Philip, King of France, and Leopold, Archduke of Austria, the king said, warming to his subject. They were supposed to be on this expedition, but they ran home when things got difficult. They're rats, both of them. Leopold even complained that I had insulted him. Seeing the king grow agitated and worried about his health, the attendant attempted to soothe him. Suddenly, running footsteps were heard, and a messenger burst breathlessly into the tent. Aftermath. King Richard and Saladin continued to fight each other for another year. Their respect for each other grew. In the end, they reached an agreement. The Muslims would keep Jerusalem, but allow Christian pilgrims to visit it. Other territories conquered by the Crusaders would remain in European hands. On his way back from the Crusades, Richard was captured and imprisoned by Archduke Leopold of Austria. His former ally had not forgiven him for his insults. Eventually, England paid a ransom to have him freed, but Richard never returned to the Holy Land. He died of wounds received during a battle in France in 1199. Saladin founded a new Islamic dynasty, the Ayyubids, who ruled Egypt and much of the Middle East. All right, number 1 asks, which is not an event that led to the First Crusade? 2, why was this control of Jerusalem so important? 3, many blank people believed that Muhammad ascended to heaven from Jerusalem, who believed in Muhammad. 4, the Muslims knew the First Crusade was going to happen. 5, the blank empire thought they were larger, richer, and more powerful than the Islamic Empire. 6, empires were often too big to govern. 7, the First Crusade was a success for the Europeans. 8, what caused the Second Crusade to happen? 9, the Europeans defeated the Muslims in the Second Crusade. 10, the blank were an elite group of soldiers who fought for the Caliph and ruled parts of the Islamic world. 11, Richard the Lionhearted ruled blank. 12, why might Saladin have let Jerusalem stay in the Christians' control? 13, a blank is a fiction story that takes place in the past. 14, there are real people in the story of Saladin and Richard the Lionheart. 15, there are parts of the story that are fictional. 16, what did Reynald do to break the treaty with Saladin? 17, King Richard trusted all of his allies. 18, why would Richard say that he was behaving as chivalry demands? And 19, Richard and Saladin agreed that blank would maintain control over Jerusalem, but allow Europeans to visit. All right, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye, Adams.